how did you get started in the tabletop role-playing hobby?
Hey, Jim, it's the OG GM here, aka Mike Strauss, broadcasting from Site B in sunny Southern California. Thanks a lot for sending me these questions to interview me. It's always awesome to hang out with you. So here's your answers. Question number 1. How did I get started in the tabletop role-playing game hobby? I've said this story several times. It's kind of weird in a backwards way. It's definitely unique as opposed to others. My introduction to the hobby came through the figures, not through the hobby itself, but through the early lead figures and all the fantasy dragon pewter figures that were around at that point in time. I was first introduced to them in a teeny little store in the Glendale Galleria. I can still picture it to this day, which is weird. That just had 4 shelves on each wall and a little teeny register and a little teeny back room. We were just lined with the little dragons, the little pixies, the little pewter Lord of the Rings figures, the very early first draft generation figures that were even, just starting to be used for D&D. We're talking 1976, 77. And I asked the guy what they were from, and he said D&D. Obviously, all of them weren't for D&D, but I guess a lot of them were D&D adjacent. And of course, I'm 7 years old. I asked Santa for Dungeons and Dragons, and that Christmas, Dungeons and Dragons white box shows up under the Christmas tree. No idea what it was. Read through it, barely understood it, goofed around with it, I guess, sort of played Dungeons and Dragons for a couple years, but I really didn't start gaming till we moved to Studio City, and I met other people and kids and adults in the neighborhood, and we played a little D&D. I was gaming with people all ages, the whole entire, Southern California Studio City gauntlet of weirdness, but then Champions, Villains, and Vigilantes both came out at about the exact same time, and those were the games that really caught on where I lived in Studio City. It was hard to find a D&D game, but there were superhero games everywhere. I don't know why. Maybe superheroes just appealed more to a Southern California, Studio City, North Hollywood crowd than fantasy or whatever. Maybe I just unconsciously was drawn to people playing superheroes. So I didn't really play D&D for a couple years, even though I had them, and then I would buy the new books. But yeah, actually my introduction to the hobby and the first games I actually played from like 10 years old on was Villains and Vigilantes and Champions and the other very early superhero role-playing games. And I didn't really start in a D&D game till much later. So that's how I got started in the hobby. And I gotta admit, it's a little weird origin story compared to everybody else's. It's sort of backwards, because I was like the figures first, then the rules for Dungeons and Dragons, but I was playing superhero role-playing games kind of really before I was playing D&D, if that makes sense. So thanks for the question, Jim. How did you get started? Talk to you later.